I'm going to go ahead and start us off. Obviously, anyone else that joins us will join us in the meantime. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Marine Industry News Export Insights USA in association with the GMBA and PSP. I'm Lindsay. I'm the Commercial Manager of Marine Industry News, the largest growing fastest growing news brand in Europe. We have over 12,000 subscribers to our daily newsletter. So if you are not currently receiving it, make sure that you are signed up so that you can get it. Just a few housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please could you send them through on the chat function to me specifically, not to everyone. I will then at the end, when we have our Q&A session, after Thomas has finished his presentation, we'll then go through them at the end rather than disturbing the presentation as we go through. Please keep your microphone on mute. We are recording this session, so we obviously don't want any interference during that process. I'm now going to hand over to Jo Dixie from PSP, and who are kindly sponsoring the event. So straight over to her.
Hi there. Yep, I'm Jo, and I'm the director of PSP Logistics, and we are a freight forwarding company specialising in yachts, motorboats, and the shipment of marine equipment. I think probably a lot of people have heard of us from our boat show sponsorship. So we've been around for quite a while, and we do a lot in the US, whether it's shipping from all over the world to the US or across the US. We have partners on both sides, so we can deal with our time difference and everything. Shaun's just arrived, but he's too late. Do you want me to say anything else? Is that sufficient?
No, that's absolutely fine,
Okay.
Jo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm now going to introduce Thomas Dammrich. He is from the GMBA. He will be presenting an insight into the American marine market. Just remember, if you do have any questions, please send them through on the chat function, and then we will answer them at the end. Either Shaun or Thomas will then, I will ask them the questions, they will answer them. So thank you very much, Thomas. Take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So it's a pleasure to participate in this Marine Industry News series. And as I begin, I want to recognize and thank the National Marine Manufacturers Association and their Director of Business Intelligence, Vicki Yu, for their assistance with the preparation of this presentation. You will note the attribution for much of the data is given to NMMA, and the great work that Vicki Yu does in collecting and disseminating business intelligence on the US market. So starting at a very high level, recreational boating in the US is an economic engine. It generates over $170 billion of annual economic impact. There are 3,000 manufacturers, over 11,000 marinas. The direct economic impact is about 61 billion. Total output from recreational boating, 149 billion. And the boating industry generates over $20 billion in taxes to state, local, and federal government in the United States. So the government needs recreational boating, and they need our tax dollars. And when they have, on occasion, mistreated boating, they've seen their tax dollars fall precipitously. But this industry generates nearly 700,000 jobs just in the United States. Including 111,000 manufacturing jobs and almost 80,000 jobs in marinas. So a broad overview of the US market. It is the largest boating market in the world, representing over 50% of the world market. There are 327 million people in the US. I think that number may be slightly higher with the latest census, but also 100 million households. But importantly for boating, 95% of US residents live within a 1-hour drive of a navigable body of water, which is why one of the reasons why the U.S. is such a strong boating market. We have one boat for every 7.7 households. I know there are other countries like Finland that have a much larger proportion there, but it's still very strong. There are 13 million registered and documented boats in the United States, and I'll show you later how those are distributed throughout the country. Power is the primary type of propulsion in the United States. Sail represents less than 2% of the US market. Unlike many other parts of the world, 95% of all the boats registered in the US are trailerable boats. They're less than 26 feet in length. So American boaters are very mobile. Only 1% of total boats, so 1% of the 13 million registered boats are over 40 feet in length. And 60% of boat owners have a household income of less than $100,000 a year. And why is that important? Because boating in the United States is very much a middle-class American lifestyle. So last year, 2020, we sold in the US 1.3 million total boats. That represented just under 1 million pre-owned boats and over 300,000 new boats for the first time in over a decade that we've sold that many new boats since before the global financial crisis. And you can see that the proportion of new to pre-owned is getting back to more normal levels where new represented 75, where 20 to 25% of all boats sold. Americans spend a lot of money on recreational boating each year. And in fact, in 2020, we estimate that Americans spent $49 billion directly on recreational boating. That represented $19.5 billion on new boats, $11.8 billion on pre-owned boats, $8.8 billion on boating accessories, and another $9.3 billion on all the other things that boaters spend money on: marina fees, gasoline, storage, maintenance, insurance, financing, etc. As you can see, the industry went into a pretty significant decline during and after the global financial crisis, and it actually took almost 10 years to get back to the level of total expenditures Americans were doing prior to the global financial crisis. But in the last 5 years, that spending has increased almost 30%. If you look at the US boating market, there are 20 of the 50 states account for 76% of all US boating expenditures. And I list the top 10 here, and you can see that they are primarily coastal states is where the boating spending occurs. Now you see Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Wisconsin, these wouldn't seem to be coastal states, yet they are all part or on the Great Lakes, which and therefore are considered coastal states. So, but important to understand where the boating concentration is in the United States. And if we look at all the registered and documented boats, the 13 million registered and documented boats in the United States, 82% of those boats are in coastal states. And you see them primarily along the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, the southeastern United States. If we look at the center of the country here and over here, that represents only 18%. It's a very large part of the landmass. And there are lots of great inland waterways there, but it's only 18% of total registered boats. Now, I've just spent some time explaining what a large industry the boating industry is, and it is, both in the US and globally. But as you all likely know as well as I, there really is not one boating market. The boating industry is made up of many segments, and many of them can be fairly small when taken alone. And if we look at the graphic here on this slide, the biggest volumes of boat sales and boat registrations are on the left in PWCs, freshwater fishing boats, and pontoons. Saltwater fishing also very popular. As we move over to the right, the volumes decline, but as you get to the far right, the cruisers and the yachts, the dollars become much more significant, but the numbers of units much smaller. So NRMA monitors the internet and Google Trends to understand what the level of interest in boating is based on internet searches, how many people are searching on boating terms, to get a sense of changes in consumer interest and sentiment about boating. And here we see that in the middle of 2020, consumer interest in boating really took off and remains at probably near all-time highs. So in 2020, there were nearly 100,000 first-time new boat buyers in the United States, and that's up 33% from 2019. So clearly, and I'll talk about this a little more, but as Americans spent more time quarantining at home with their families and looking for things they could do with their families that remain socially distant, boating became the most likely, the most obvious choice. And so we saw sales of new power boats exceed 318,000 units in 2020, up 12% from 2019, and the highest level since well before the global financial crisis. If we look just at the first quarter of 21, we see momentum continues very strongly on a year-over-year basis. The change in boats sold by segment, we see in the first quarter, PWC sales were up over 100%, pontoon sales up 56%, wake and sport boats and runabouts up 64%. So we continue to see very strong growth in sales of new boats in the first quarter of 2021 relative to last year. Of course, the first quarter of last year was the beginning of the pandemic when people were starting to hunker down. But this data is really the same data as I just showed you, but instead we're comparing, rather than to a year ago, we're comparing to the previous 3 months to get a better sense of the short-term trends. And so the first quarter of 21, we saw new boat sales declining pretty much across all segments relative to Q4 of 2021. And I think that clearly that is due to some of the supply side constraints, supply chain issues that the industry is experiencing, and frankly, some capacity constraints in manufacturing, while at the same time having extremely low inventories at the dealer level. So with lean inventories, whatever builders can produce is what's being sold. And so we saw that all those kind of issues combined to take sales down a little bit between fourth quarter of 20 and the first quarter of 21. So if you're looking to export to the United States, there are a couple of ways to do it. One is to work with an exclusive importer, so an exclusive distributor of your product in the US, who would on your behalf build a dealer network and market your product. The other is to directly build your own dealer network in the United States. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But my advice is always to go for the best, and certainly that will serve you well. So we look at distribution in the U.S., the dealer demographics. There are over 3,600 brick and mortar dealer locations in the United States. 40% of those locations belong to multi-location dealerships. So we got organizations like Marine Max and One Water and other smaller multi-location dealerships. 40% of all dealer locations are part of these multi-location dealerships. And 2/3 of these dealerships are located east of the Mississippi River. So if you kind of draw a line almost down the middle of the country, it's probably about 40% of the geography is east, 60% is west. But most of the dealerships and actually most of the boating activity is east of the Mississippi. The average dealer has about 15 employees. So the average dealer is relatively small. They averaged about 3.8 million in sales in 2018. That's probably a little bit higher today, but still relatively small. Only 7% of dealers have annual revenues in excess of $10 million. But these are a lot of the large multi-location dealerships. And 10% of dealers in the United States are certified by the Marine Retailers Association of the United States, or of the Americas, actually. And this is important because when you're looking for a dealer, someone who's taken the effort to become marine industry certified is someone that you know is very concerned about growing their business and very attuned to customer satisfaction. So, dealer expectations, I would encourage you to be dealer centric. If you meet dealer expectations, they will perform well for you. You need to provide margins that allow them to make the money they need to make to operate profitably. You need to provide them with protected territory, and you need to provide good warranty and warranty reimbursement. If your market is the aftermarket or accessories, there are two ways to access the aftermarket in the United States. One is we call one-step distribution, which is direct sales to big box retailers like West Marine, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, Dick's Sporting Goods. Those are the main ones. There are probably some others. The other way to access the distribution market is through two-step distribution, through distributors who sell to dealers and dealer networks. There are about 20 two-step distributors in the United States, and ICOMIA has a list of all two-step distributors in the United States and actually in all of their member countries throughout the world. That is a very valuable resource and is available to you. So who's buying all these boats that we're so gladly selling these days? And I'll go into this in a little more detail, but we've created, or NMA has created personas, buyer segmentation of who's buying boats, both repeat buyers and first-time buyers. And your affluent Americans and fast-track couples, which I'll describe for you in a moment, are your biggest source of new boat sales. And your affluent Americans are primarily repeat buyers. So these first-time buyers are coming from the fast-track couples, from the sport utility families. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they look like. So the affluent American, this is largely repeat boat buyers. They're 51 to 65 years old. They have prestigious housing, luxury products, upscale cars, healthy lifestyles, and world travelers. They have household incomes that exceed $250,000 a year, tend to own their own home, and their children are in their mid to late teens. Their technology adoption is moderate. If we look at who's, where a lot of the new boat sales coming from, it's these fast track couples who are aged 31 to 35. Their incomes are, between $100,000 and $125,000 a year tend to own their own home. Their children are younger, 7 to 9 years old, and they are comfortable spending, have active lifestyles, are very tech savvy, music lovers, and credit aware. And finally, I mentioned the sport utility families, which are also driving the first-time boat buyers in the U.S. These are families where the head of household is 36 to 45. Their children are 10 to 12 years of age, and their incomes are more in the $125,000 to $150,000 annually, and also homeowners. These sport utility families are very active with their children, and they live in the suburbs. They're comfortable spending, involved in lots of athletic activities and outdoor leisure activities. And while they're busy saving for college, they're also looking to create memories and opportunities for family activities and family togetherness. In the U.S., reaching the consumer, the boating consumer, is, even though we've had almost no boat shows in the last year, sales have increased, as I've discussed earlier. But there are over 350 boat shows in the U.S., and we expect, we've seen a few of them start up again, and expect as vaccinations become more widespread, we'll see boat shows returning very strongly. The most important international shows in the United States are, I'm sure, familiar to all of you. They include the Annapolis Sail Show, the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show, Miami International Boat Show, and the Miami Yacht Show in Miami. Of course, there was an announcement this year that the Miami Yacht Show and Miami International Boat Show will be combining at a new location this coming February in downtown Miami to probably be the largest boat show in the world. In terms of other ways to reach the boating consumer boating publications, there are 3 or 4 main boating publication groups. Active Interest Media, I won't read all these publications to you, but Bonnier, Harris Publishing, and Southern Boating, and Boat US. Boat US magazine actually is the magazine with the single largest circulation and readership. But as you can see, there is a large variety of boating publications that address the various segments of the boating industry in the United States. If you're new to the US market, some associations that you should be aware of because they can be helpful to you. Aside from the National Marine Manufacturers Association, we've got the Marine Retailers of America and the National Marine Distributors Association. So when I talked about the 22-step distributors earlier, they are members of the NMDA, and of course, the Association of Marina Industries, which is the front door to boating for many boating consumers. So what's the outlook? NMMA regularly surveys marine industry CEOs to assess their sentiment. And in the most recent quarterly survey, 95% of marine industry CEOs said they viewed business as expanding or stable. 70% saying it's expanding. So it's interesting as you look at Q1 of 20, 81% of CEOs said business was declining. Of course, that was just around the time that people were being asked to stay at home, not go out. Businesses were being asked to close down. And so there was a significant amount of fear. Fortunately, that turned around very quickly, as by spring, boat sales started to grow and CEO confidence and expectations began to improve dramatically. If we look at this slide, is really kind of the same data as the previous slide, but the previous slide looks at the assessment of how things currently are. This slide, we've asked CEOs what their expectations are in the next 6 months ahead. And we can see that Marine CEOs were feeling good when MMA took their pulse in the first quarter. New orders are up significantly, even though pushing those orders through production and out to the consumer is having some bottlenecks due to supply chain issues. The issues that the industry are facing are, I suppose you could characterize as good problems or growth problems. How to get more product to the marketplace. So short-term expectations have been dampened a little bit by the supply chain issues, and they're more tempered than they were in the previous 3 quarters, but expectations are still very strong for the U.S. market. So what are the headwinds as we look ahead here? The lack of inventory and the supply chain issues that constrain production and supply are clearly a challenge at the moment. And the customer experience, as there's concern that as dealers are very busy selling, that we're maybe not paying as much attention to servicing the customer as we should. And if we don't, that will have absolutely, surely long-term ramifications for the industry. So that's an overview of the U.S. market and where things are today and where it appears they'll be heading in the near future. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that anyone might have, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Thomas. That was very insightful and informative. We appreciate it and appreciate you taking the time to talk to us all. We're just going to have a short Q&A session. So if people have any questions that they would like to ask, please can they send them through on the chat function. We have already had a couple of questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask either Thomas or Shaun. So I'm just going to go through the questions that we've got. So basically, one of the questions is asked around customs procedures and logistics requirements to actually import their products into America and buying USA equipment. So I think Shaun's probably the best person to answer that question. So if Shaun, if you'd like to take it away there.
Yeah, mainly it's preparation. Make sure that if you're selling to America, that your buyer has a broker who's got power of attorney set up with them and they're all ready to do the customs clearance. We try to hold people's hand if they don't have that, if they're a new dealer or a new buyer. And the same in reverse, if you're buying from America, you need to make sure you know what your exposure is when you're bringing it in back into UK for taxes and duties and that sort of thing. And also at the moment, with logistics being a real difficult situation with space on ships, to make sure you realise your lead times could be extended with the problems that are actually out there at the moment. So most of it, like most things in business, is just to be prepared in advance, really, to make sure that your people you're working with have all that in hand. And we're very lucky, we've got partners on all East Coast and West Coast and Midtown, Midwest. And so we'll be able to help anyone in those areas, whatever region they're in. But like anything in business, it's the prep you do beforehand to make sure it goes smooth.
Thank you very much. A question for Thomas. You describe an industry on the rise. Is the new normal boating, and can we expect this great run to continue?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we can for a little while. Clearly, I think people have rediscovered families and they like their families. And so they are looking for opportunities like boating for healthy ways to do things together. But we know historically that our fortunes as an industry are closely tied to economic conditions and consumer confidence. And I think that the forecasts from the economists are that we should continue to expect pretty strong growth, at least in the US economy, but I think through many parts of the world. for the next couple of years at least, and maybe the next 2 or 3 years. Certainly, with all the government spending that's being proposed in the United States, that will be a strong stimulus to the U.S. economy. And so I think this can continue for a few more years. But let's not delude ourselves. We are a cyclical industry. The economy eventually will turn down, if not severely, at least mildly. And so I think we always need to keep in our mind that we need to be prepared when things do slow down. So, enjoy the good times, but prepare for the bad times.
Thank you. We've had a question asking you to elaborate about the sailing market in the US specifically.
So the sailing market, very interesting. When I had joined NMMA now almost 22 years ago, the sailing market represented about 4% of the total US boating market. Today is really less than 2% and declining. I guess I have no explanation other than the usual explanations that sailing requires some skill that power boating doesn't require. And although I think the sailing industry has worked very hard to promote sailing, it is declining, and it's declining across all size lengths of sailboats. So I'm not sure that I think it'll probably be able to hold its own here at this 2% level. I'm not sure what it's going to take to see sailing growing in the US.
And do you think there will be a large American contingent attending METS this November?
That's a great question. I think there will be a good sized contingent of companies, American companies exhibiting at METS. METS has been a very important show globally. And, with the pandemic, people have not been able to visit with their customers other than by Zoom for the most part. And I think people are anxious to get out. So I think it's going to depend on how widespread vaccinations are by that time. I'm fairly confident that most everyone who wants a vaccine in the US will have gotten a vaccine by that time, so there won't be any issues. Europe has been a little bit behind in getting vaccinations out. So I think, but there's a lot of time between now and November. So I think if the level of vaccinations is up and we see the number of cases declining and hospitalizations declining, and it appears that we've got COVID on the run, certainly there'll be a strong contingent of exhibitors there. Maybe not as strong in a contingent of attendees, but then the US contingent of attendees is not the biggest part of METS attendance anyway. So.
Brilliant. We're just going to take one more question. What are some things on the horizon that you think the industry needs to address?
So it's interesting. I have a friend who I recommended, was looking to buy a new boat. And he told me what he was looking for, and I recommended a manufacturer, and I actually recommended a dealer, because the dealer is as important as the manufacturer. And he purchased a $100,000 new boat about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The dealer called him, said the boat is in, come on in and get it. And he drove 60 to 70 minutes to go pick up the boat. He got there. They did all the paperwork. He gave him a check for the down payment. He signed his loan papers. He was financing the boat. And then they took him to see the boat and said, congratulations, but unfortunately the boat didn't come with all the parts you ordered. And we're not sure when we're going to be able to get these parts. And I began to think about the good old days in boating. So our sales are at good old days levels, and that's wonderful. But those good old days also had some worst practices. And one of them was shipping boats that weren't finished to dealers and asking the dealer to be the last 50 feet of the manufacturing line. And I'm hoping that this was a one-off for this gentleman and is not something that is becoming practice. But I sense that with the supply chain issues, manufacturers, rather than having boats sit in their yard or shipping them, and they might not be 100% complete. And I think that's going to create some bad experiences for the consumer. I think if the dealers don't provide the level of after-sale customer service to make sure that these new boaters that we're attracting get fully acclimated into the boating lifestyle, we may lose them. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we had a huge turnover among first-time boat buyers. If we can make sure that we're servicing these new boat buyers so that we don't get that huge turnover, I think there's very prosperous days ahead. But if we continue to turn and churn new boat buyers, I'm not as optimistic. But in addition to that, I think there are issues related to government regulation, sustainability, climate change, new types of propulsion, whether it's electric or hydrogen, that are all going to have an impact on the industry in the coming years. And it's one reason why the marine industry associations around the world are so important to the industry, because they fight every day on behalf of the industry on government regulation, and work to help address issues of sustainability, climate change, and promotion of the boating lifestyle. So clearly there are always challenges, but the industry has stepped up and addressed these challenges in the past. I'm confident they will step up and address them in the future. I'm excited to see some of the new electric boats. Correct Craft has a ski boat. It's electric powered that skiers. So the electric boat is no longer confined to one that just putt-putts around at five miles an hour through the marina. And Brunswick recently announced that they're going to be introducing some new electric propulsion here in the next couple of years. So I think there's some exciting developments going on for the industry, as well as some challenges that are going to need the industry to focus on. And but I am confident, not only in the industry, but in the industry's marine industry associations to address these issues successfully.
Thank you very much. So I just want to take this moment to say thank you to everyone who attended today. Thank you specifically to Shaun and Joe from PSP, who sponsored the event and helped make it happen. Thank you to the GMBA, and specifically thank you so very much, Thomas, for taking the time out of your day to speak to us all. That is it from us. So we are signing off. I hope you found it interesting, and please get in touch through our social media. Email me at lindsay@Marine Industry News if you have any specific questions. But I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.